Welcome to day 94. We've got Judges chapters 19 to 21 today and the fourth chapter of Second Corinthians. Okay, I'm just going to straight up say it. Judges 19 to 21 is a terrible, terrible, awful, horrible, no good reading. It is really hard to come up with anything good to say here. The first thing I want to point out is that this story follows the format of the story of Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. So if you think you've heard this story before, you have. We've got a guy who's traveling. He's got his wife, his concubine with him. They're having a hard time finding hospitality when they stop for the night. Now, hospitality is a critical cultural value, not just for the Jewish people, but for all the people in this time period in this region. This is an arid, dry climate. There isn't just some place you can set up camp and live. You have to find a place to stay with someone in order to have water, in order to have safety both from bandits but also from wild animals. So this guy is sitting in the town square. No one is giving him hospitality. Another person, another outsider who is temporarily in town, sees this guy and his entourage and gives them shelter. Now, while he's there, the neighbors, the men of the city, come pound on the door and they want the guest given to them so they can sexually abuse him. Instead, the concubine woman is sent out. She is abused so horrifically that she ends up dying from the experience. Now, Israel gathers to destroy the Benjamin tribe because this city is there, and it goes through all sorts of stuff there. And today, what I want to really clarify here is that this is not an LGBTQ story. This is not something to raise up and say, God is against homosexuality. Now, clearly, what is going on here is rape. This is a sexually violent crime. This is not about healthy sexual intimate relationships among committed partners. This is about a group of people exerting power over strangers and outsiders in a horrific, violent way. So we have to look at this just as we look at the Sodom and Gomorrah story, which is referenced in other parts of the Bible. And it is clear that these are stories about the lack of hospitality. God is clear that strangers are to be cared for throughout the Bible. The Good Samaritan is another story that Jesus uses to talk about how important it is to care for outsiders. Hospitality is an aid, and we are all called to be hospitable to others. Now, you could say, I don't see people, having this problem today. We've got lots of hotels. But I think one of the ways that we have to struggle with hospitality and sharing our resources today is that we have a massive housing crisis in the United States. We have a lot of people who are homeless, a lot of people who are doubling and tripling up in housing because they can't get apartments and they can't get houses. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is how are we sharing our land and our space for housing in our cities? One of the things that most of us aren't aware of is 75% of the residential land in cities and towns in the United States today is zoned for single-family detached housing on lots, sometimes substantially sized lots. And because of this, there's very little room to build enough housing, especially when we need multifamily housing, maybe duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, with 4 families in one building, or even some low density apartment complexes that are maybe 2 or 3 stories high with maybe 12 units in them. We don't need to be building skyscrapers everywhere, but most of the communities in the United States have set up their zoning in such a way that is very expensive and very difficult to build more housing that is affordable so that everyone can have shelter. So I think when we read this story, we don't need to look at the violence part of it so much, but we are creating barriers for our neighbors to get the housing that they need and deserve so that they can have stable lives by having very strict zoning codes that limit the types of housing that can be built in our communities. When we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul, this is a little bit of an interesting chapter. He's talking about staying in the open, even if you are going through some really tough times, to not manipulate God's word for your own usage, but to be transparent with God's words, that we are the messengers of Jesus, that God's light comes through us, that we might be having hard times, but we keep working for God. Now, what's the lesson in all of this for us today? I have to say, it's not the easiest chapter to read through. But I think one of the things we have to think about, especially as churches, is that we don't have bait and switch situations. What are our tactics of sharing God's word with others? What are our tactics in marketing and promoting our churches and our faith families to our communities, to people who are looking for a church home? I think sometimes the church has used tactics that have not been upfront with what we're doing and what we expect. One of the biggest issues that my LGBTQ friends and family have talked about is the churches that say they are welcoming, but when you get in, they have a different meaning of welcoming than what the LGBTQ community is looking for. So there are some churches that promote themselves as welcoming. They have banners, it's on their websites, it's on their bulletins, and they do truly, honestly welcome all people. But their unspoken expectation is that some people will have to deny part of who they are or change who they are in order to be full, equal members of the church. So there are churches that do not allow women to be leaders on their councils or pastors. They welcome all women, but they place barriers to the full inclusion of women. There are churches that welcome LGBTQ people as long as they remain celibate and are not in any relationships, or deny themselves and try to become straight, cisgendered people in traditional male female relationships. And I think this is one of the areas that churches have to think about: what are we doing and how are we doing it? And does a sign that says we're welcoming, but then we require people to change who they are or limit people's involvement in our church because of some aspect of who they are? I think we really have to look carefully at that. And we need to make sure that we are not doing bait and switch, and that we are transparent and clear about who we are, what we believe, and what our expectations for people are. So this was not an easy day of reading. I totally understand if you're like, yeah, not reading those chapters again. I get it. I get it. This is tough. But I think there are still some nuggets of insight that we can take from these tough readings. And hopefully tomorrow we will have a new set of readings that brings a little more light into our lives. Have a super day. We'll see you next time.